power-hungry politician, or just a lot of coincidences? Follow me down the rabbit hole about Lyndon B. Johnson. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about President Lyndon B. Johnson. This is the prequel to JFK because next week, I know you guys have been looking forward to it forever, I'm covering JFK finally. Yay! So this is like the prequel to it. It's really important that we cover LBJ because of like some of the conspiracies with the JFK assassination. They come back. So you have to understand Lyndon Johnson and like everything that happened in his life before we can really get into JFK. That's why I'm doing it like this. So anyway, I really quick, just some business to take care of. I've opened the merchandise store, so please go check that out. I hope you guys can get all your merchandise, everything that you want before Christmas. So and I'll be running a Black Friday sale, so make sure you check that out as well. And also I should be having a baby any day now, hopefully. And so if you go a week or two without an episode, I apologize greatly. I'm working through it, okay? I'm trying to get it all done, be a mom and be a fantastic host for you guys. So please just give me some grace in this weird time, this weird transition, right? So anyway, let's get into it. So Lyndon Baines Johnson was born on August 27th, 1908 in Central Texas. He was born like pretty close to Johnson City, which his family actually helped to settle back in the day. He was the first of 5 kids to Sam and Rebecca Johnson. Sam was a businessman and a member of the Texas House of Representatives, and Rebecca was the daughter of a state legislator, Joseph Baines. So obviously politics it was like in his blood, right? But despite Sam's legislative career, the family actually struggled to make ends meet. And you have to understand, this is the early 1900s. There's a lot of crazy stuff. Like, politicians didn't make money the way they make money now, if you know what I mean. After graduating high school in 1924, Johnson spent 3 years doing basically odd jobs, just trying to earn enough money to put himself through college. Eventually, he went to Southwest Texas State Teachers College in San Marcos, which is now Texas State University. And while attending university, Johnson took a teaching job at a predominantly Mexican-American school in Cotulla. I think that's how you would say that, Texas. The extreme poverty of his students at that school made a huge impact on him. And you'll see this throughout his political career if you followed Johnson's political career. We're actually not going to we're going to get into it a little bit, but we're going to not get into too much of his politics because that's not the point of this episode. After graduating from university in 1930, Johnson became a debate and public speaking teacher at Sam Houston High School in Houston. That same year, he participated in the congressional campaign of Democrat Richard Kleberg. Richard Kleberg was was a son of the owner of King Ranch, which is the largest ranch in the continental United States. And fun fact, this has nothing to do with LBJ, but King Ranch is actually the inspiration for Ford's King Ranch Edition truck. I don't know why I decided to share that with you, but just a fun fact for you. Okay, so when Kleberg won his election, Johnson went to D.C. with him as a legislative assistant. This was in 1931. Dude's still pretty young, he's just trying to dip his toe into the political world. But while he was in D.C., Johnson worked hard. He was a hard worker and quickly grasped the hang of congressional politics. In 1934, Johnson married Claudia Alta Taylor in San Antonio. She was known as Lady Bird, and it seemed that Lady Bird was like a much needed source of stability in her husband's life, and she was also an excellent judge of character, which I'm sure helped in Johnson's like political career, being a politician, doing all those things. You need to know who you can trust and who you can't. In Washington, so he went back to San Antonio, got married, went back to Washington to stay working with Kleberg. Johnson's career just like kept progressing. He befriended a fellow Texan, Sam Rayburn, while he was in Washington, and Rayburn was a powerful chairman of the Committee on Interstate and Foreign Commerce. And later, Rayburn became the Democratic leader of the House of Representatives. So that's a good person to know if you're going to be Johnson in the future. Johnson was the director of the National Youth Administration in Texas from 1935 to 1937. And in 1937, he ran for a seat in the House as a supporter of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, and he won. So that worked for him. He represented his district in the House for most of the next 12 years. And I say most of the next 12 years because in 1941 to 1942, Johnson served as lieutenant commander in the Navy in World War II. He was the first member of Congress to serve on active duty in World War II, so that's kind of cool. And during a flight, Johnson's plane was attacked by Japanese fighters, which would be terrifying. So General Douglas MacArthur awarded Johnson the Silver Star for gallantry, and Johnson proudly wore the decoration for the rest of his life. Because, who wouldn't? Are you kidding me? I would too. So after his stint, in the Navy, then he came back to the House. In 1941, Johnson ran and lost for the seat in the United States Senate. And then he ran for Senate again in 1948. And this is where our story gets very interesting. Because up till this point, he's just like a normal old guy doing normal old political things, right? Well, on the night of the election, September 2nd, it seemed as though Johnson had lost this Senate race. He had lost the election. Mysteriously, a box of uncounted ballots was discovered in Alice, Texas. After a recount, Johnson ended up winning the election by 87 votes, so not very many votes at all. And just in case, this is one of the earliest cases of voter fraud that I've ever heard of. Probably the earliest case of voter fraud. I don't know. Maybe there's more. But this is, yep. And I touched on this a little bit, in the voter fraud episode where I was like, oh yeah, Lyndon Johnson. So if you didn't know, let's get into it. So the FBI, the Postal Department, and a couple others investigated, what the heck's going on, right? So during the tabulation period of these ballots, LBJ's campaign manager, John Connolly, traveled to Alice, Texas. That's convenient. Connolly actually was present during the recount, whereas Coke Stevenson, who was the opponent of Johnson at the time, his political manager or campaign manager wasn't present during the recount. So anyway, after everything was said and done, it seemed 202 new voters had just shown up and voted last minute. But some of these voters were dead, and some of them were not even in the county on election day. And these alleged voters lined up in alphabetical order at the very last minute, all signing their ballots in the exact same blue ink, in the exact same handwriting. That seems very coincidental. I don't know about you, but I don't really believe in coincidences anymore. So, interesting. So Coke Stevenson took LBJ to court over this and was like, something's not right. And the judge ordered his name to be removed from the general election ballot. Well, LBJ turned to Washington attorney and former FDR appointee Abe Fortes for help because he was like, I need to be the senator. I don't know why he needed it so bad, but he needed it. So Fortes persuaded Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black, who was also appointed by FDR, to intervene. And Justice Black did. He overturned the Texas court's ruling. And this left the decision to rest on the Texas Democrat Central Committee. Well, Johnson's running as a Democrat, so anyway. Later, in return for his favor in the 1948 election, Johnson named Fortes justice on the Supreme Court in 1965. So right after he became president, once he was elected president, I should say. But Johnson had this guy in his pocket. This guy's name was Edward Clark. Edward Clark ran a law firm in Texas. He was a lawyer. And according to a 1950s Reader's Digest article, Clark was basically like the secret boss of Texas. He ran Texas underground. So from the late 30s to late 60s, he had many close relationships with Texas judges and legislators, basically like high people that you want to know. He's the guy. And he also was like had control of the quote unquote round table that apparently ran the state at the time. So basically he was in charge of the whole state. Just like he was the man behind the curtain. He would eventually become the governor, but he was the man behind the curtain. Clark was one of LBJ's closest confidants, and it was Clark that handled all of Johnson's legal affairs. So Clark was Johnson's lawyer, and he ran Texas. It is also rumored that Clark is like the mastermind behind Johnson and is the reason Johnson eventually became president. Clark's power and influence was essential in forging Johnson's political career. So basically, without Clark in his corner, Johnson would have never been who he was. But you have to remember that at the time, everything was about being in like the good old boys club. You scratch my back, I'll scratch your back type of deal. So Clark knew a lot of people. He was very influential, but that kind of like went in a lot of different ways. And it actually kind of makes me wonder later on, like all the things that Johnson did for Clark in return, which I don't have the answers to that, but I'm sure that Johnson had to do a lot for Clark as like the senator, as the I don't know, he had to do a lot. But after it was clear that Johnson had lost the Senate race in 1948, Clark had made a call to the right people, so the precinct in Alice, Texas, who was basically like in charge of the votes. He suggested that a mistake had been made and that Johnson actually had more votes than what had been counted. There needed to be a recount. But because it was so obvious that they rigged this election, LBJ became known as Lying Lyndon or Landslide Lyndon. So it depends, like, if you're trying to be nice. Landslide Lyndon was his nickname after this election, but more likely Lying Lyndon if you were from Texas, that's what you called him. It is also rumored there were a great deal of mysterious deaths that appeared on Johnson's rise to political power. So a prisoner was supposed to meet with Coke Stevenson to like basically come clean about the election, but before they could have their meeting, the prisoner was found dead by suicide in his cell. And in fact, the coroner at the jail, he pronounced him dead by suicide like quickly. So if we thought the Clintons were bad, Johnson was the original. I bet the Clintons learned so much from Johnson. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I'm not trying to be suicidal. I'm not suicidal. So if I wind up dead, just know that I'm not suicidal. I feel like that's something I should say in the Hillary Clinton episode. Lyndon Johnson, it doesn't matter here. But anyway, in the future. Okay, so after the scandal of the 1948 election, Johnson and Clark basically agreed that no hint of another scandal could ever attach itself to Johnson's name if he wanted to continue his rise in politics. So if he wants to keep being a politician, he needs to, and eventually be the president, he needs to be squeaky clean because there's already too many rumors about him after this election. So maybe they should get somebody that can take care of all the things for them. So a man named Doug Kinzer was a small business owner. Allegedly, he was pressuring Josepha Johnson, who's Lyndon's sister, to influence her brother. Kinzer wanted government money for his business. And it's not known for sure, but Kinzer may have also been blackmailing Josefa because Josefa was kind of into like some weird sexual things. Not weird for like our time, but like weird for their time, right? So she was basically going to sex parties, and she was going to like threesomes and orgies with other women and with men. And at the time, first of all, you have sex with one person, not multiple people. Secondly, you only have sex with men. You don't have sex with women. There are no lesbians or gays allowed, period. That would have been a huge issue for Johnson because it's his sister. So a man named Mark Wallace worked for Edward Clark, and it is believed, again, this is all alleged, all rumors, that Clark ordered Wallace to kill Kinzer. So Wallace was caught because Kinzer died, right? So Wallace is caught, and while being convicted, 11 jurors were completely 100% for the death penalty. They're like, yep, kill him. He's a murderer. Well, one of the 12 jurors was holding out for just life in prison. They're like, well, don't kill him. The judge that was proceeding over the case must have been one of the judges that Clark had in his pocket, because the sentence for Wallace was only a 5-year sentence. Basically, the judge was like, okay, thanks like for your suggestion. Obviously, he's been found guilty of murder. I'm just going to give him 5 years. And then the judge suspended the sentence. They're like, yeah, just kidding. So Wallace actually walked out of the courthouse just a free man. He didn't go to jail or nothing, literally nothing. Dude murdered somebody, walking away free. That's how much influence Clark has in Texas. It is thought that with this murder, again, all alleged, I don't have proof, but that basically this murder solidified Wallace as like the official hitman for Clark and subsequently for Johnson, because Clark and Johnson are like best buds. And just like a really quick note, in 1998, one of the fingerprints that's lifted off the rifle that was found in the Texas School Board depository was Mark Wallace's. And if you don't know anything about the Texas School Board depository, you must not know much about the assassination of JFK. And I'm going to cover that next week. So don't panic. I'm going to cover all of that. But with that, and I know this is a short episode, I'm so sorry, but I needed to get all this information to you. That way you know exactly all the weird history behind Johnson, all the crazy things that he would do to rise to power before we get into JFK. Because one of the conspiracies is that Johnson is behind the assassination. There's a bunch of conspiracies, so I'm going to get into everything next week, but this is just setting us up like a precursor. So, thank you all. Until next week, my friends, stay skeptical, and I cannot wait to cover JFK with you. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.